Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Asch. Today, we are joined by Assemblywoman Bauer Kahan, who represents the La Mirinda, Walnut Creek, all the way through the San Ramon and Tri-Valley areas. I appreciate you being here today. I don't think you need a big introduction because most of this audience already knows you, but why don't you talk about the 2024 legislative session and we'll just dive right into it. What are some of your big accomplishments that have happened and what are you proud of so far?
They say not to fall in love with your bills, and I always do. I think you can't do this work unless you're passionate about it. It's hard for me to pick favorites, it's like my children. But I think some of the things I'm most excited about us accomplishing this year were we got a bill to the governor's desk that actually helps with water access in California. I have to say, as someone who was water chair for 2 years, I never dreamt that possible. It is the hardest topic to touch in the legislature. That is really incredible, and then I was given the responsibility of overseeing AI regulation in our house in January, and that has been both me moving what I believe will be impactful bills and also helping to guide the rest of the bills into something that is important and impactful, but also will not stifle innovation. I think that has been a challenge, but something that I have enjoyed, and I'm proud of where we landed at the end of the session.
All right, let's dive into the AI. There's a lot happening. And I was talking to the chancellor of Contra Costa Community College yesterday, as well as a couple of weeks ago to Kathy Sandine from Cal State East Bay. And we're talking about how do they embrace this? Knowing that 75% of students are probably already using ChatGPT to write their papers. How do you tackle this from that standpoint you talked about not stifling innovation, but creating privacy management and imaging tools?
Yeah, it's a really incredible challenge and opportunity we have at this moment. And to your point about academia, this is the new frontier, right? This is the next industrial revolution. And we need to ensure that our workforce is prepared for it and that they are a part of it, right? And I know one of the things that we are really concerned about as a government is the workforce, making sure they are not left behind as we transition. And that instead, this becomes a tool that ensures that we are doing more for more people while also ensuring that folks have living wage jobs here in California. That's a piece of it, and I'm glad academia is focused on it because they've got to be our partners in that workforce development piece. But to your point, 90% of Californians say they want AI regulated. They don't trust it. It's our job to create a system of AI regulation that enables trust. Because if there isn't trust, people aren't going to use it. And there's such incredible opportunity here. And part of trust is privacy. One of the bills I carried this year was just updating the California privacy law, which is the strongest in the nation, to build in privacy protections in AI tools that output your personal information, which seems obvious, but wasn't clearly protected under the law. Some of this is just tweaking things to bring it into modernity where we are today, and some of it is bigger and more robust. We moved a bill that didn't make it to the governor's desk that would have allowed for us to move to a place where decision tools that are deciding for you housing, lending, healthcare could be tested in advance and for bias, and we can make sure they're not making biased decisions. As a woman in the workforce, I know that when I walk into an interview, there may be bias against me in the legal profession. And having the opportunity to take that out of a tool, that's really an incredible future. I think the opportunity is there, but we need to trust these tools and know that they're not perpetuating historical bias or giving up our data or whatever the case may be. And I think as a former regulatory lawyer, we can do that while allowing for innovation to continue. And I actually think that people will be more prone to use it, which will allow innovation to thrive even more. I think that balance is there, but it is incredibly hard.
Addressing those biases is tough.
Yeah. And a great example that Amazon actually put out a few years ago, they built their own tool for hiring. It was a automated decision tool. It was for their tech sector. They put in the resumes of their people that they loved. And guess what the tool learned? That men were better at programming than women, because as we know, there are more male programmers than there are female programmers. And so the tool just learned that. Now they tested for it. They actually went public with that to show the dangers of these tools, and they didn't deploy it, which is actually what we were looking for in this law is just we don't want to perpetuate that. We want more women in engineering, right? But we cannot use tools that learn from this historical problem we have to then continue it. That's the kind of thing we're trying to get rid of, and there's opportunity to do it.
And you also had a bill along that lines with imaging, which
Mhm,
has come up at the with the actors in the Screen Guild that they want to own their own face and body. But as a parent of three young daughters myself, which I know you're a parent, there's
mhm.
some concerns about how other kids could bully kids with this. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that bill and your thought process behind that.
California has the strongest right to publicity law in the nation for our actors who monetize their name, likeness, and voice. They're pretty well protected. What we found was that when the bill was written originally that protected their right to publicity, there was no way to use that voice and likeness after someone died, right? The technology wasn't there to create new works using someone who was deceased. That has changed with Gen AI. One of the things we were doing in that bill was providing them with that same right after they're deceased for um, uh, decades to their estate. So that's just again an important update to our law as technology's changed. But one of the things that you're talking about is the deepfake technology, which is incredibly scary. We continue to see girls at high schools across the country where they're using this very accessible deepfake technology to bully, to in some case make deepfakes that are pornographic of these young girls, which is so disturbing and upsetting. And again, our law is not standing up to that kind of technology because it's outdated. And so there were a couple bills that moved this year updating that. Now, to be honest, it's hard because these things butt against the First Amendment protections, right? So how do we move these things forward in a way that's constitutional? And as far as I'm concerned, and the courts are as well, pornography is not protected by the First Amendment. I think those will stand up, but we anticipate there could be challenges.
And where do we go with the future? You've set some framework this year. Where do you see the next year to 5 years in policy on AI evolving as the technology also evolves?
One of the things we worked really hard to do in the legislation that passed through the privacy committee that I chair was make sure these bills were nimble enough to deal with the future, right? This is not a static technology. And so we don't want to create static law that is outdated 6 months from now. That was something that we worked really hard on. We were privileged that the California State Legislature has a program called the Science Fellows, where PhD scientists come in and advise us. It's one of my favorite things. I had a water chemist who was my PhD fellow when I was the water chair. And this year on privacy, I had a neuroscientist who's an expert in AI who helped advise me on the technology side of things. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a technologist. Together, we were really able to know and think through these things. What is the compute power today? How do we anticipate that changing? How is cost going to fluctuate over time as it relates to that? Dealt with these bills and the thresholds in them. That's really important to make sure we're doing, but we also need to know that we are gonna have to make changes, that we're gonna have to keep up with the times. We're already behind as it relates to regulating these tools, but we need to try to do our best to get there and know that we're nimble enough to make changes, which is one of the benefits of state legislatures over Washington, is we do have the ability to modify law as necessary, but we wanna make sure we're doing so in a way that's smart.
I want to pivot from AI now into homeowners insurance and fires. The hills in Orinda, Moraga, Lafayette, a lot of homeowners have lost insurance. There's an
Including me,
insurance,
Jared.
including you. There you go. How is the state working to address that? How are you working to address that?
One of the things that we need to be clear on is we have the lowest insurance prices in the nation because of our highly regulated market. We haven't kept up with the cost, to be honest with you, as it relates to the wildfire risk. And one of the things that has happened is that the process is really slow. Even some insurers just couldn't get their rate increases that they had sought years ago. Some of it is just moving the pipeline faster, removing some of that red tape. But a lot of it is really honoring the fact that our risk profiles are real and that we need to allow for the cost of insurance to reflect that in order for our market to function properly. What the insurance commissioner is doing right now is allowing insurance companies who make certain guarantees to us, for example, that they're going to remove high fire zone folks that are on the FAIR plan onto their insurance plans. They have to agree that they're going to take on high risk plans and homes. And then for those folks, they can use this wildfire modeling. So they can actually price it to risk. And that's something that I think will hopefully in our areas where we do have high risk, where we are on the wild and urban interface, we're going to see ourselves paying more than we were paying. I will say It is anticipated to be significantly cheaper than the FAIR plan. Some of the numbers I've seen is 75% cheaper than the FAIR plan. So people like me who are being forced onto the FAIR plan, the risk modeling will still be significantly less expensive than that, but allow us to get back into the admitted carriers. That's a big piece of what is happening. What am I doing? So that is in process. I think it's the right move. We're hearing from the insurance companies it's the right move. Allstate made a statement a few months ago that if these regulations were in place now, they would be writing like crazy. So we know we're going in the right direction. The question is, we need to do it fast because people are losing their insurance now. We're ensuring that those processes are going as quickly as possible. I put myself on the insurance committee this year to make sure that's a part of it. I also want to say that our communities have worked hard to try to be partners in reducing some of that risk. You'll see a lot of our neighborhoods are firewise now. One of the things that we're trying to do is also make sure that people understand how do you drive that risk down such that you can both get insured and drive your costs down under these wildfire models. So there needs to be certainty in what those factors are, and making sure those are really transparent is a piece of it. That's a couple things we're working on.
We have the head of AAA insurance coming on to the podcast, and she was saying in her prep for it, there's certain small things that we need that homeowners can do that would mitigate it. And she just was telling me an example is if you have a wooden fence that goes up to the sides of your house, particularly in the front, that's kindling for the house. And
Yeah.
she's like, if people change that in a slight way to a different material or fire code, it really makes a big difference to even protecting your house and reducing our fire risk.
Yeah, another thing that people don't know is leaf guards on your gutters. That's another huge small step people can take because those leaves sitting in your gutters are kindling.
Tim Waltz, the vice president nominee, had a whole shtick recently in an interview about the need for gutter guards and why are people still going up on ladders. So put your gutter guards in. Let's talk about retail theft hitting places like Livermore with the shops, San Ramon, Walnut Creek in your district really hard. This year that you guys passed a lot of bills to address this. Talk to us about some of that.
Yeah, and that's been one of those things that the community is feeling, and they're talking about it and they're seeing it. It's affecting them. And cities like San Ramon and Walnut Creek in my district that have these wonderful places for us to come together as community and shop and support our cities are suffering. And so we've been really focused on it. One of the first things the governor did that really made an impact was he was able to deploy some state resources to folks who needed more. Right now, our law enforcement departments are having a really hard time hiring. They just need support. We were able to give some CHP to local cities to ramp up, especially during the high times during the holidays and beyond. And I think he's continuing to do that in cities around the state. That's important. We need to support that. We need to help them get the resources they need to do the work every single one of us wants to do. And then to your point about the legal changes we made, we need to make sure that people are accountable. And how do we do that? And that's really critical. We made some changes this year. One of the really important ones for our community is we have these thresholds for what constitutes a felony, and it doesn't aggregate across county lines, right? I live in Orinda, and I often will go shopping at a grocery store in Alameda County and then come home and go to a second store here in Contra Costa County. If you were to hit those two stores prior to this legal change, that doesn't count as the same crime because it was across counties. In the 9 county Bay Area region, that's ridiculous. We made changes like that to allow for aggregation across counties, really looking at the laws and how we could change them, which is important. Although I'll say I really want to give one more shout out to our cities because Walnut Creek did something that has been game changing for them. And that was for those that shop in Walnut Creek, they made a change to that center thoroughfare through the mall that you used to be able to drive through. You can no longer drive through it. And it has completely changed the dynamic at that mall because there is not easy access in and access out. And it has really driven down their retail theft problem. How do we partner with folks to understand what are all the tools in our toolbox and how do we use them? Now, one of the things we saw when that happened was one of my favorite consignment shops that's outside the mall then got hit, right? So we got to be careful about making sure that we don't just move the problem elsewhere. But some of those changes are at our fingertips and we should be utilizing them as well.
Yeah, I think there was a valet right in front of the Apple store. They moved it 30 feet further and it just it cleared that path of, hey, let's park right here and rob the Apple store
Hmm.
in a smash and grab. Small changes, going back to the fire example, small
Yeah.
changes can make a big difference to our community. You've done a lot on the environment, including being a leader on plastic bags and microplastics. Talk to us about why has that been a concern and what are we doing about it?
It's the number one issue in our district. When you do polling of our community, climate change is top of mind for folks. It's probably because of our fire risk and other things, but it's also because we love the environment. I don't know about you, but I moved here because I love to hike and I love nature. And that's true of, I think, most of us. That's true of me from a young age. And I'm the mom of three kids like you. Like my teenager loses sleep over whether or not he's going to have a planet that is safe for him to inhabit. That is real for our youth. And we need to be doing our part to really address it. We caused the problem. We can't leave it to them to fix it. I moved a lot of environmental bills over the year. We did a bill last year that was signed into law that saved the bees, something I'm incredibly proud of. Bee collapse is a huge problem. We removed use of a pesticide that we know is a source of bee collapse. This year, I focused on plastics. We passed a bill that hopefully the governor will sign that will remove all those thick plastic bags from grocery stores, paper only. For Trader Joe's shoppers out there, it's Trader Joe's for everyone. And that's going to be huge because we know that those bags are used 12 minutes on average. They were meant to be reusable. They're not, and they're just ending up in our landfills and our waterways. And they're turning into microplastics, which the studies have recently shown there is so much plastic in our bodies from these microplastics. And that's coming from a lot of sources. The primary one for everyone to know is your clothes. And you actually can put something on your washing machine that cleans out the microplastics so it doesn't go into the waterways. It's a filter, just like your lint filter. But one of the other bills was I started to get at this question of microplastics a year ago, a bill that didn't make it to the governor. And I started to realize that because microplastics are in so many different things and in so many different places, there was about 15 different agencies with a little piece of that puzzle. Nobody was solving it because there was just this huge diffusion of responsibility. This year, I started to get at that more global problem. And I said, okay, let's charge this one group with bringing those agencies that all have a piece of this problem together, figuring out a plan and putting it into place. Make government work better. We all agree this is a problem. We all agree we should fix it. And government shouldn't be so complicated and outsized that we can't solve it.
Yeah,
And I was really excited that made it to the governor's desk.
that's really cool. And I'm going to go investigate this washing machine thing. And I think the shirt I'm wearing is made from recycled plastic bottles. And that's come up before the plastic bags. If you go to Trader Joe's and stuff, you get your spinach and it comes in a plastic bag. And I know California is moving to require companies to make those compostable because right now that just sits there in the trash. It gets
Yeah, it's one of my I love Trader Joe's, but they could do better on their packaging for sure. I do not need my tomatoes wrapped in plastic.
Yeah. What other climate bills or climate priorities have you been particularly focused on?
Water's been big. When I took over as chair of water 3 years ago, I spent the first 3 months I didn't know a ton about California's water. I knew nobody wanted to be in charge of California's water wars, and now I was, but other than that, I didn't know much, and I spent the first 3 months really working with the scientists and the experts at Stanford, at Berkeley, labs, understanding our conundrum as it relates to drought and water, and one of the things I learned that in about 22 years, they predict we will have no more snow in the Sierras. That is a huge problem for California. For anyone understands our water, it is our biggest reservoir is our snow melt. And there will be rain, it just won't be snow, and it will be captured and moved differently in California, which will be game changing. 2 decades. That isn't very much time when you think about building infrastructure to change the way we store and move water. We need to be ringing the alarm bells about this. And I think that's a really critical piece. It's very hard. Nobody in the water world wants you to change a thing. But the reality is, our water is changing. So we have to change with it. The bill that was signed into law focuses on what do we do in times of scarcity. Currently, we have a system where the governor can tell everybody, okay, we only have this much water. You all need to use 40% of your allotment, right? Because it's a shared resource. If we let everyone at the top use it all, people at the bottom won't get any. And there's no way really to enforce that in short order. It takes weeks to stop someone who's using too much, which can drain an entire river. This raised the penalties for that to make sure that we are all behaving so that everybody gets the water they need. And it's not that some have a ton and some have a little in times of scarcity. The other thing that's really important and that we need to continue to work on in the water space is that the future is going to be these atmospheric rivers. It's going to be dry, and then we're going to have these huge flood events. And the best, California is blessed with some of the best ground in the world. It's a funny thing to say, but our soils capture water and hold it incredibly well. And that's true mostly in the Central Valley. And what we have done there is instead of allowing, as the native people did, for that rain to come down and be captured into our soils, we built these concrete waterways that move our water and keep it where it's supposed to be instead of allowing it into those floodplains and into the ground so that we can use it in the dry periods. One of the things we're working on is reopening our floodplains, returning it to the way it was, because it's actually the most beneficial way to store and use that water. We opened a new state park in the Central Valley. I hope everyone will go visit it, and it is on a floodplain. Now, I've been there post floods, and it's incredible. The birds are loving it, the animals are loving it, and so is our ground.
That's really cool. And just to think about how that'll impact ski season, but the and the economy of California, right? When that changes, but the long-term impacts of capturing all of that water that's running off. And for those of you who don't know that are listening, what we're talking about with water runoff, as that snow melts through August sometimes and September even, it's continuing to fill our lakes and our rivers and our reservoirs. And if it's not snowing, if it's coming down faster, we could lose all of it. And that's happened in the last couple of years as
Yeah.
things melt faster. You've been a leader on women's issues, from reproductive rights to menopause, a subject I know very little about.
We're going to
But
change that, Jared.
talk to me about what you've done to lead on these issues and what's got you focused on this.
Yeah. When I joined the legislature as a legal nerd, someone who went to law school 6 blocks from the Supreme Court, I was very aware that after Trump won the presidency and the opportunity he may have, at the time we didn't know, to replace people on the Supreme Court, that Roe v. Wade was very much in jeopardy. And so immediately I formed the First in the Nation Select Committee on Reproductive Health to look at what we needed to do to prepare us for what I was afraid was an inevitability, which has now come to pass. And I think the first few years was really understanding what is the state of abortion access in California and full reproductive health access. One of the things we really want people to understand is that with an influx of people seeking reproductive health in California, your OB appointments, even if it's just your regular appointment that we need you to go to get your testing, may be hard to come by. Us building up an infrastructure really allows for Californians to have good access to full reproductive health. That was really critical. We have healthcare deserts here in California. You and I live where there's plenty of healthcare. That is not true across the state. And we worked to understand that landscape. And then we took steps to build it up to protect California's physicians and patients, people who came here, knowing that our doctors would never turn anyone away. How do we make sure that everyone here is safe and gets the healthcare they need? I think we've done a lot of work. I did 2 more bills this year. Clearly, I don't think we're done with that work. One of the most impactful bills I think I did this year focuses on the parts of California that are denying the permits for our reproductive health clinics. We have cities across California that are saying, nope, we don't want you here. And so this bill really streamlines those clinics to make sure that they have access to opening communities where they're already zoned for healthcare clinics. You can't turn them away because they're providing reproductive health care. We continue to do that work. But as I'm 45, and one day you will know more about menopause because every woman who lives long does go through it, I realize that there really is equity issues along our reproductive health life cycle. And so this year we started to focus on the equity around menopause care. And we have a bill on the governor's desk. I believe it's the first in the nation that will provide some equity for
My wife and I are both that age. No comments. I'll stay out of
that.
trouble of that. Uh, I want to hit on the reproductive rights issue because other states are banning people from coming to California and getting it or getting shipped medicine. From the California perspective, how are we working with those people and those doctors to help women in need?
Yeah, it's actually one of the reasons I was just telling a reporter this recently. One of the reasons I ran for state office was under the Trump administration, I understood the power of states' rights, right? The power California had to hold true to our values, even in the face of a federal government that wasn't going to protect them. The upside is California gets to lean into our values and protect Californians. The downside is other states get to do the opposite. That's states' rights, and you can choose where you live, and California welcomes all of you. So I think that what's important is that we focus on what we can do here within our borders. I passed a bill that ensured that our physicians couldn't be extradited for criminal charges out of state for providing abortion care. I've been called out for this because I've done a piece of legislation that does affect other states to the extent that I can. I'll be honest, I will. We have most of the tech companies located here in California. One of the things we did was we affected their ability to hand over documents under foreign subpoenas for those crimes. Now, Uber, for example, a San Francisco based company, will no longer hand over any documents related to a ride that happens no matter where it happens, if it's an abortion crime that it's being sought on. And so we are looking at what should we do in California to hold true to our values, even as other states betray them. But there's not much we can do about what other states are doing.
That's a reason for a company to stay in California and not go to Texas or
Yep.
something then. Okay, talk about as a parent, both have young kids. Talk to us about what you're paying attention to. You talked about climate change, and what advice do you have from a legislator's perspective for other kids with parents out there in changing times right now?
I think the thing that is really something that has been a piece I never thought I would work on 6 years ago when I entered the legislature, but has now become central to my work is the mental health crisis. As parents, we know that it is real for these kids. How can we as a government make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them, to lift them up, to provide them with the resources they need to really thrive and learn? You can't learn if you're struggling, right? We want our kids to be at their best and ensuring that their physical and mental health are doing great is a part of that. And I've done a lot of work around suicide prevention, which we know is an epidemic amongst our youth. The statistics are off the charts as it relates to the number of youth that are thinking about suicidality. And so I worked on the suicide prevention hotline. But then after that, which is really the moment into care when you're in crisis, what I realized in that moment was that we had to get them earlier. Why are we focused on helping? We should be focused on helping them at the moment of crisis, but we should also be focused on ensuring they never get to the moment of crisis. This year, one of the things I did was move an effort. Last year, the governor, to his huge credit, funded wellness coaches in every one of our schools. And to his credit again, it was one of the things that was not on the chopping block this year as we struggled with a really tough budget because he is dedicated to helping fight our mental health crisis. And one of the things I did this year was I moved legislation around what should those wellness coaches be doing, right? We're paying for them, but we want to make sure that they are using the best science-based tools to give our kids the tools to be resilient, to know how to deal with those emotions as they face them, as they go through puberty and beyond. We're really gearing up those wellness coaches to give our kids the tools they need where they are before they get to crisis. And then hopefully we'll have less in crisis and more resources to support them. But so one of the things I want to say is we're here. If a kid is in crisis, make sure they know they can text 988. It's one of the things we want our kids to really understand. They don't call, is they only text. And our 988 crisis hotline does allow for texting. You will get a response from someone who is trained to support someone in crisis. But also that we want to provide kids with, just like sex ed, we want them to have mental health education as well, resiliency. We want them to be built up to really deal with it. And the more that I study this and learn about it, it's really just mindfulness and the ability to regulate our emotions and understand how to deal with them and deal with what's happening online. And I will say that's another big piece that we're after is how do we deal with this crisis of bullying and the effects of social media on our youth, which is very much real.
Wow, that was probably one of the best answers to that question out there. I appreciate that. You're only about halfway through your term in the assembly based on term limits. When all's said and done, when you leave, what do you want to have your legacy be? What do you want to be proud of? I know there's still a lot of work to do. How will you judge yourself at knowing you've done a great job?
I'm Jewish, and there's
Yeah.
a Jewish teaching that has always been a huge part of the way I live my life, which is that not any of us can repair the world on our own, but what is incumbent upon each of us to do just a little piece of it. And if each of us did our little piece together, we would repair the whole world. And that's how I live my life. I can't do it all. When I leave in 6 more years, if the voters invite me to do it every 2 years, I get to decide if they send me back. I will not have fixed these things. There is no question about that. There will be more to do. And I hope whoever comes after me shows up with the same values, intensity, and passion that I do every day. But I want to have left my mark on the things that matter most, really, to our kids. It's why the huge part of it, it's why AI is something I'm so excited to do. I think we screwed up so badly at the advent of the internet and allowing social media to innovate at all costs. And we're paying the price in ways that are catastrophic to our democracy, to our youth. We can do it differently with AI, and it's an opportunity. And I happen to be serving at this moment in time, and I'm going to take it. And we're going to do better this time around. And so I think if I make my mark on each of these things, then I've really made a difference. And the other thing is they say if you've saved one life in Jewish tradition, if you save one life, you've saved them all. And I really do believe the work I've done in mental health crisis will save lives. You know, and if I go out now, I'd be proud.
The Cone alum. Yep. Anything else that I haven't asked that you want to add?
One of the things I always try, I say two things. One is vote. I think vote up and down ballot because people pay attention to who they're voting for, usually at the presidency, maybe Senate and Congress, and then that's that. But the closer you get to somebody, school district, city council, the more impact they have on your lives. Pay attention to those races. Hard to get information. So find sources you trust, whatever that is. League of Women Voters, for me, it's Sierra Club, because I'm a huge environmentalist, whatever it is that you trust, and pay attention to those local races and then show up to vote. So that's a big piece. And then engage. We are public servants. My job is to show up every day and represent the 500,000 people in my district. And I can only do that if they're communicating with me. We have a website that makes it super easy to tell me what you're thinking about and how you feel about whatever it is, legislation, something that's happening in our community. You would be shocked by how few people do that, even in our incredibly engaged community. We get 100 people calling in on an issue. We're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? It doesn't take a lot for us to sit up, pay attention, and really make sure we're dialing into what the community needs us to do. Check out your local elected officials' websites, call them, be engaged. We really want to hear from you.
That's come up from some Generation Z elected officials at the local level, that people are using AI to write those letters into them. And they're like, we could tell that you didn't write this. It's obvious that there's no emotion and no personal story to this of why you are against it. That just brings this whole conversation back to a full circle of the AI bills and where people are using AI.
But so let me just say, for us, like our form, you can write one sentence. Even if we don't know, I want you to fix my wildfire insurance. We're hearing about that a lot. Utility rates is something we've heard a lot about this year. It doesn't take you don't need to write me a 10-page letter. Don't let that scare you. And if you want to use AI, that doesn't bother me. You're communicating with me. But really, it's just a touch point. And I find during the pandemic, one of the things I struggled with was when I'm at a public event, the events are great. But I find the first 10 minutes before it starts and the last 10 minutes before I leave to be the most interesting. Because what are people actually coming up to talk to me about? It's really the pulse point, right? The same is true when people write in.
I appreciate it. Assemblywoman Bauer Kahan from the Contra Costa Tri-Valley area. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Fun convo.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.